let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening for the basics of commercial leases. My name is Sarah Block and I'm the Senior Development and Communications Manager at Brooklyn Legal Services Corporation A, or Brooklyn A. Maybe you've known about us for our over 50 years of existence, or you're new friends. But if you're unfamiliar with us, Brooklyn A is a free legal service provider that believes that all New Yorkers should have equal access to legal services to seek justice, make their voices heard, and overcome systemic racism and oppression. We were established in 1968 as a part of the war on poverty. And we believe that attorneys and social workers and other advocates have a critical role to play in combating poverty, injustice, inequality, and racism. Our civil legal services, organizing efforts, and educational resources assist our clients and their communities in defending and mobilizing against harassment, displacement, and gentrification, as well as in asserting their rights. This evening, I'm very happy that Brooklyn A will be presenting with Bill Angelos, who's our Deputy Director of our Community and Economic Development team, and Loveleen Zuriah, a Senior Staff Attorney for the CED team. And we also want to state a very special thanks to Councilmember Julie Menon for sponsoring tonight's event. We're sorry that the council member wasn't able to join us, but we thank her so much for supporting our work and helping to promote tonight's event. Tonight's webinar is a part of the Commercial Lease Assistance Program, or the CLA program. The CLA program offers free legal services to qualifying small businesses across New York City and is run by the New York City Department of Small Business Services, or SBS. SBS works to create stronger businesses and builds thriving neighborhoods across the 5 boroughs. The CLA program is just one of the many resources offered by SBS. The agency also offers courses, trainings, financial assistance, and much more. You can get connected to resources through the NYC Business Solutions Centers across all of New York City. And to find out more information, you can visit NYC SBS's website. And now we're ready to get started with tonight's presentation. Just a quick note of housekeeping. Please hold all questions until the end. We'll have ample time for question and answers. When we reach the question and answer portion, you can either type your questions into the question and answer box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or you can use that little hand button to raise your hand, and we'll unmute you so that you can ask your questions verbally. I'll now turn it over to Loveleen to get us started on the basics of commercial leases.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'll start by walking you through what the Commercial Lease Assistance Program is. As Sarah stated, we're funded by the New York City Department of Small Business Services. We launched in 2018 and thus far have served 2,500 businesses in 5 boroughs since then. We are a free legal service as we are funded by the New York City Department of Small Business Services. We have a list of the services we offer, but I'll start by saying that we will negotiate a new lease or any leases that need renewal. We're happy to review any terms of a current lease that you have, that you're entering into or have already signed and would like to know what you've actually committed to. We are willing to negotiate a lease termination or assignment. We negotiate sublease agreements, so where you're the tenant and you want to rent out the space to someone else. We also help with enforcing the terms of a lease, a sublease, or even an oral agreement with a landlord. And then we also help with resolving landlord harassment and breaches of any obligations that a landlord has under their commercial lease. Now, when we reference non-litigation, we don't actually go to court and argue for your cases. However, we can provide any outside court advice and or assistance. And I'm sure we can discuss that on in a later slide on what that looks like. Next slide, please, Sarah. So who do we serve? We serve New York City small business owners. To be eligible, a small business must be a small business according to the United States Small Business Administration. So all small businesses in New York City usually qualify. Located in New York City, not a franchise establishment. And we do prioritize business owners whose annual income household is below 500% of the federal poverty guidelines. And so we have a chart here to help assist with that assessment if you would qualify. Next slide. Commercial lease is a contractual agreement to occupy a commercial space. So we like to often explain what a commercial lease looks like in opposite of a residential lease. Now, a residential lease, if you are renting your own apartment, there's a lot of regulated protection under the law. So, in terms of security deposits, in terms of, notice that needs to be given, all of that is protected under the law. There's also legal restrictions on the rent that landlord may charge for an initial or renewal term. There's also a legal requirement to renew a lease. So in opposite of commercial landlord, where there isn't that legal requirement. There's also a duty on the landlord to mitigate damages. Now that could mean that, if you're trying to get out of your lease, your landlord has to allow you to leave, but also has to be willing to put another tenant in there so you're not liable for the entire term that you signed the residential lease for. And also in residential lease world, we have legal assistance and a right to counsel. So more likely than not, you have a right to getting counsel. Now in a commercial lease, we're really looking at a completely different dynamic. There's no regulated protection under the law, so you're on your own. You have to make sure that you protect any rights or obligations you want in this contractual agreement, in this commercial lease. There's also no legal restriction on the rent that the landlord may charge for an initial or renewal term. And so this is where we're extremely helpful. We'll go in and make sure that if there is a renewal option, that the renewal option lists all the rent specifically that you're committing to paying for in the future for that renewal term. And we'll also restrict how much an increase can be year to year. Also, there's no legal requirement to renew a lease. So landlord, even if you've been there for 5 years, could decide to not renew your lease. And so the way we try to protect that is to ensure there is a renewal option in your lease. There's also no duty on landlord to mitigate damages. So let's say in year 2, you want to leave the premises and you have 5 years left. Unfortunately, you may still be liable for that whole term of that 5 years. So it's extremely important that it is negotiated well, because the landlord doesn't have to put someone else in that space to help mitigate the damages you would owe. Happy to explain that as we move further along in the presentation. And there's also no legal assistance or right to counsel. So it's very different than having a lease for an apartment. And I'm happy to go into that further as we move along. Next slide, Sarah. Next slide. Oh, sorry, thank you. So what is a commercial lease? So historically, it is landlord driven. Now, what do we mean by that? We mean that it is traditionally commercial tenants do not have as many protections as residential tenants, as I've explained. It's really important to negotiate all of your terms at the start. So since this is a contract that is binding once executed, meaning signed by both parties, you are basically bounded by what you have committed to in that contract. So if the contract discusses the terms that you are concerned about, you're okay. If it doesn't, then it's usually a vague area where lawyers like us would have to get involved to assist sifting through what the resolution would be for a problem. There's also, as I've stated, no rent regulation or right to renew unless we negotiate it. Now, with leases, they traditionally look one of two ways. More often than not, you'll see something called the ribbony form lease, which is the Real Estate Board of New York has their own lease form that has been standard for years, that is commonly used and is extremely landlord friendly. And it's often full of legalese, which we call, legal verbiage that most business owners do not fully understand. And that is often the case. Now, what we'll see is a lot of landlords' lawyers will use these Ribney form, but also add their own riders. Now, what does that mean? They are adding basically a document that supplements the Ribney form, but often has even more landlord-friendly terms in it. So it needs to be looked at together. And more often than not, the rider will say that it overrides the Ribney lease on anything that is contradictory. So for example, if damage happens due to a fire and both the Ribney form and the rider mention it, the rider is what will control if there's ever a dispute between you and the landlord. That's just an example. Other landlords' lawyers, they use their own lease. More often than not, what we have seen is leases are written by landlords, and their lawyers can be very landlord friendly. And depending on how many properties the landlord has or their experience, that really determines how long or short that lease is going to be. Next slide. So a good lease, in our perspective, and hopefully from the perspective of yours, is fair to both sides. Now, what we mean by fair is we want to ensure that the tenant is protected and can focus on running the business, right? So it's really important that anything that you discuss with the landlord is actually accurately reflected in the terms of your agreement. You should never have an oral understanding not in the written lease. So for example, this is just I'm just giving you a egregious example. So let's say the landlord says, you pay me $5,000 to get this new lease. However, that payment is not covered in the lease. That is, first of all, that shouldn't be happening. Second of all, that should not be, if it is happening, we need to make sure it's covered in the lease in some way so that there's credit given to the tenant. That's just an egregious example of what could happen. Or for example, let's say they'll say, oh, I'll give you the renewal option, but you sign a lease that doesn't have the renewal option in it. Unfortunately, you've signed a lease that doesn't have the renewal option, and therefore your oral understanding is not the understanding. It's actually what you signed. So it's always important that you have the terms written into the actual lease. And also, a fair and well-drafted lease can help avoid bigger problems. So for example, let's say there's a fire on premises. What happens then? Let's say, you are required to carry insurance and your insurance lapses, or you aren't able to pay the premiums. So it's really important to ensure that the lease captures all the different types of situations that could come up between you and landlord. Next slide. Now, how does the commercial lease process look? So we think it's really important to walk you through this so that you know sort of what a commercial lease negotiation or a commercial lease deal looks like. So it first often starts with finding a commercial space. You connect either with the landlord directly or to a landlord's broker or a broker of your own. More often than not, it's the landlord's broker. And then you express interest in the space. Now, ideally, in a perfect world, we would like you to express interest in a letter of intent. Now, what is a letter of intent? It's basically a document that agrees, let's say the 10 main terms of the lease. You will agree upon those as a template for the actual lease. So that means you have some form of an agreement on the major terms, but you're going to use the lease negotiation to air out anything else that might be tangential. So, what would happen in a case of a dispute, in case of a fire, in case of, you wanting to renew, those are things that you would cover in a lease negotiation, whereas the term of the lease, the rent, the increases would be covered in a letter of intent, along with some other terms. So then you negotiate it, you sign it. Once it's signed by both parties, you cannot change those terms. What you've committed to in the letter of intent must carry over to the lease. Now, this is where typically negotiations start beginning. If you skip the letter of intent phase, then it goes immediately to the lease negotiation. More often than not, a letter of intent gives the confidence to both parties that there is at least an understanding on the main terms. And so when lease negotiations begin, like we've referenced before, there are 3 separate documents involved, right? So there is a lease. It could be the RIBNY form. It could be the rider attached to the RIBNY form or a rider to a general lease document that the landlord prepares, and then a guarantee. Now, I want to briefly mention what a guarantee is. And so it is a personal guarantee. So let's say I have an LLC and I, Loveleen, am the manager and director of that LLC. Now, on the lease, the LLC is liable for paying the rents. However, if the LLC cannot pay those rents, then I am personally guaranteeing that I will pay those rents. Now, there's 2 types of guarantees, which we will go into further later on. But basically, one guarantee has absolute liability and one allows an out. Meaning if I decide within 2 years I want to leave the space, I can give notice as a director of the LLC and get out of personal liability. I'm happy to explain that later on. But then lease negotiations often take a few weeks to a month or more. So we want to be very realistic here. Any landlord that is pressuring you to sign immediately, like yesterday, today, next week, you should be very wary of, because more often than not, they're putting pressure on you to ensure that they get favorable terms and not you, right? And so they understand there's a business need for you to get into the space and to make money and to run your business. So they often use that to put pressure on you. However, we recommend in those situations, you take your time, because more often than not, in pressure situations, you will not get favorable terms. And if you're going to be in the space for a long time, it's very important you have favorable terms. So after lease negotiations begin, we would recommend that every tenants do a walkthrough of the premises. You want to see what conditions it's in. You want to see if there's any landlord scope of work you want done by the landlord. You want to make sure you're signing the place you actually want for. And then you, at that point, both landlord and tenant would sign the lease, and then the security deposit is paid along with first month's rent. And then you also have final step, which is you take over the space after the execution of the lease. Next slide, Sarah. Excuse me. So how to approach entering into a commercial lease? Like I emphasized earlier, take your time. Seriously, if you're going to be in the space from anywhere to 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, I mean, 10 years is quite a bit, but you'll see a lot of leases between 3 to 5 years with an option to renew. For an additional 2 or an additional 5, you want to take your time. I know you want to have your space set up and you want to, landlords pushing you to sign, they want you in, but often taking extra days or weeks to negotiate can get you the right space on the right terms, putting your business in the position to be the success you want it to be. Now, this is something I hope I've emphasized through my portion of the presentation, but negotiate, negotiate, negotiate. So unlike a residential lease where there are fixed rules and the law protects you, just about everything in a commercial lease is negotiable. So if you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it. And you're also not going to know if the landlord is willing to give it to you or not. So it's always worth asking. Then also, if like I was earlier mentioning, you get what you bargained for. So, let's say it's really important to you to have a lower security deposit. Let's say, they want 4, but you want to offer 3 or 2. It's very important to voice that, because your financial position may be very tight and you may not be able to give them 4 months along with first month's rent, along with paying insurance premiums and such things. It's also important that you realize, like, if or when you may want to leave the premises, and maybe having a clause to that fact. So it's important that you think of all kinds of scenarios that may happen, but you also want to make sure you're asking for things, even if you think you shouldn't ask for them, because, that's where, a lawyer or anyone can come and assist you to ensure that, this is the market standard, but it's okay to ask, even if they say no, there's no harm in asking. So I think at this point, I'll be handing over the presentation to our Deputy Director, Bill, and he'll walk you through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Lovely. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I will be discussing the rest of the presentation. We're going to discuss what are some of the terms that the small business owners should be familiar with. I can tell you that many business owners are very optimistic to sign the lease as long as he or she knows the rent or the lease term without realizing the other terms of the lease. So these are the terms: rent, what you pay per month, and how it's calculated. And also how often we increase here, rent, and how long you stay in the premises. That's one option we do. How can the space be permitted use of the space?
Hey, Bill, we cannot hear you for some reason.
Can you hear me now?
It's a little far as well. A lot of the attendees are struggling as well to hear you.
Right now, can you hear me?
It's better. It's better.
Okay. I will repeat what I said. I just said a couple of minutes ago. A lot of small business owners are optimistic in signing the lease as long as they know the rent amount and the term.
Bill, we're still struggling to hear you, unfortunately. Do you want me to take the next few slides over while you figure out your mic? Yeah.
How about now? Can you hear me now? How about now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, that definitely sounds better.
Okay. Okay. Get the rest of the presentation will be discussion on the terms of the lease. As I stated earlier, a number of small businesses or business owners are very optimistic in signing the lease when they become aware of the rent amount and the term. But there are many other terms that small business owners should be familiar with that are as important as the rent amount and the term. So what's the rent amount? It's what you pay per month. How it is calculated? How much of an increase every year for the term of the lease? How long you're staying? What may be the permitted use of the space? The issue of maintenance and repairs. Who are responsible for repairs? How can be divided between the landlord and the business owner? It's very important to have clarity on this aspect of the term. What are the insurance requirements? Just as an umbrella, general insurance liability, or interruption policy. It's very important to know this. What are the personal guarantee under the lease? Or what type of guarantee? It'll be a full guarantee or limited guarantee. Security deposit. How many months may be turned over to the landlord, and how it may be used, and when it may be returned. Other sublease may be allowable. The lease may be amended or modified. Someone can hear me?
It was good for a while, and then just now it was coming in and out.
It was maybe a lease may be amended or modified, and may termination may be allowed. And if so, how it may be terminated. It is important to know the zoning laws as well as environmental law that determine whether or not the permitted use to occupy the space in the neighborhood. It is very important it is best to assess and inspect the premises as the best you can. Generally, landlords tend to lease the space as is. So once the lease is signed and it's an issue after the fact, then the landlord will not be responsible for the premises. So it's very important to assess and inspect the premises the best you can. And also you need to know who is the landlord and the building owners. The landlord is the building owner. And also need to know who's the property manager as well, and the relationship between the two. Next slide, please. There are three different dates: commencement date, rent commencement, and possession date. Commencement date is the date that the lease begins. So let's assume that you signed the lease today and you commence the lease February 1st. Rent commencement date is when you begin paying rent. The possession date is the date when you take physical possession of the premises. I can tell you that most business owners believe that their liability is the monthly base rent. It is not true. They are also liable for additional rent. The additional rent maybe includes can you hear me now? Additional rent may also include utilities, water, electricity, and real estate taxes. So it's very important to consider your financial obligation, not only monthly rent, but additional rent as well. Some landlord may impose what is called a camp charges, which is also known as common area maintenance, because your portion for the maintenance of the building expenses. Another term is called the build-out period. A build-out period is that when the small business owner decided to do some renovation for the space. And generally, it could be 4 to 6 months. And you should aggressively ask for the rent abatement during the build-out period. If in the event that you completed the renovation, let's just say you've been granted 6 months rent abatement, and you completed your build-out period within 4 months, and you start renting on the 5th month, the rent abatement will not apply the remaining 2 months. The reason being that you are in the business of operating a business. Another term is the late fees and grace period. Generally, the grace period is between 5 to 10 days. So your lease may not be due on the first day, but it can be due within 5 and 10 days of each month. And the late fees can be determined between the landlord and the small business owners. It can be a flat fee or a percentage of the rent. Another lease term is to be familiar with the security deposit. A security deposit is where the landlord receives payments as security against any unknown within the term of the lease. There are some instances that commercial lease permit that the landlord to apply tenant missed payments. When that happens, then tenants must replenish the security deposit. Also, upon the end of the lease term, the security deposit may be returned to the tenant. If the event there may be some damages, it will be applied for the payment of damages, and any unused portion will be returned to the tenant. Next slide, please. Property taxes. All business owners pay their share of the property taxes. I will discuss in the next slide how it's calculated. Another term is to be familiar with assignment and sublease. Why you want to consider this is that in the event that you may want to decide to move to another space, generally landlord would not permit assignment unless you ask for it and they can provide you consent. Sublease. You may want to sublease a portion of your space to supplement your rent. Terminate. You may decide to close your business or move to another location what other criteria in time to terminate and under what condition. Default. Default is when you violate the lease term. And you can negotiate when it's violated. You'll be given an opportunity to cure the default. And in the event that default is not cured, that is when the landlord will issue a termination notice. Generally, that happens when there's a missed payment of a couple of months, both monthly rent and additional rent to be property tax, utilities. Also, it can be not carrying liability insurance as well. Another term that you should be familiar with is personal guarantee and good guy guarantees. Lovely mentioned, the personal guarantee is that when the business owner is personally liable for the balance of the release term. It's also known as hell and or high water. It's unlimited personal guarantee. To take a way out of this is also known as the good guy guarantee. A good guy guarantee may be used that when you give the landlord notice, usually at least 3 months notice, it could be up to 6 months or to a year. It is best to negotiate a much tighter time frame to give notice so you can have a way out sooner. When this happens, as soon as you give notice and continue timely paying your rent, you'll be released for any future personal liability for the rest of the lease term. It does not necessarily mean that the business is off the hook, but personally, you'll be off the hook. Next slide, please. As Lovely mentioned, a letter of intent is a document that governs the basic term of the agreement. It's where the landlord and the tenant negotiated. It is very important to negotiate as much as possible in the letter of intent. A good example of a letter of intent is come out in the outline form. You can start property with the premises size, the commencement date, the terms, the rent, the permissible, allowable improvements, the security deposit. It is very important to take your time to negotiate with the landlord and to resist the urge to settle this quickly to get the process over. A reasonable landlord will understand when you need to think about it and take your time. After all, this is your major investment, and you like to start this with a good footing. Once a written lease is completed, that will govern your relationship with the landlord for the life of the lease. Next slide, please. Real estate taxes. As I mentioned earlier, all small business owners pay their share of the real estate taxes. How is being determined? The U.S. Department of Finance assesses each building the value of the real estate taxes. It can be found in the U.S. Department of Finance website. You will see the property tax and how it's determined, and also how to determine your share of the real estate tax. To determine your share, you would take your square footage you occupy and divide that by the total square footage of the building. That is your percentage of the square foot of your share. Let's say, for example, you occupy 1,000 square foot of the premises, and the total square footage of the building is 4,000 square foot. So your proportional share of the real estate tax is 25%. That's how it's determined. Next slide, please. There are two methods to assess the real estate taxes. One is called with the base tax year. The other is called without the base tax year. Here, this example is with the base tax year. You started with the base real estate taxes. The base tax year always remained the same. How do you determine your share of the proportional increases every year? You would take any increase in real estate taxes less the base tax year. The difference is the increase. That difference, you multiply that by your proportional share, gives you the real estate taxes. As you see the example for 2021, 2022, and 2023. In this example, 3 years, you have $37,500. That is with the base tax year. Next slide, please. The next example is without the base tax year. Without the base tax year, you'll be assessed your proportionate share straight up tax. As you see in the example, in 2021, 150,000, 25% is 37,000, and the same for your proportionate share of the other 2 years. If you notice that in your first year, $37,500 is equivalent to the previous slide, is 3 years with the base tax year. So it is best to try to negotiate with the landlord to assess with the base tax year to minimize your tax exposure. Next slide, please. Why apply for the CLA program? The services is free. You'll be dealing with landlord and landlord's attorney who do this every day, and they're very savvy people. You will be at a disadvantage. Once you have an attorney involved, we will even out the playing field. That changed the whole tone of the negotiation. And in addition to this, the last thing you need is distraction to deal with this issue. So let us complement you to deal with your legal issue so you can focus on managing your business. Next slide, please. How do you apply for the program? You just apply to the website, nyc.gov/ComLease, or you may call us at 718-487-2300, or you may email us at clahelp@bka.org. When you apply online, please have this information available. It's very important to have your EIN number, your business name, your contact information, your lease and end date of your commercial lease, and a copy of your lease. Next slide. There is a drop-down button in the website to translate to your native language if English is not your first language. And if you have difficulty in navigate the website, give us a call or email us, and we will assist you in completing the application. This concludes our presentation, so I'm open for questions. Someone what's considered to be a landlord. A landlord is who owns the building, the owner of the building. What are some of the common negotiation terms tenants to be asked for? You need to think about what are your needs for your business. That is very important. You need to think about what are the certain aspects that you need to operate your business. have one question. Is there a general rule of thumb for a fair build-up period? There's no general rule. As long as you negotiate with the landlord what is required to renovate the space, the landlord is very amenable to work with you how long the build-up period may be. This all comes down to negotiation. As Lovely mentioned earlier, the main difference between a residential lease and a commercial lease, in a residential lease, you have some protection. It's statutory by nature. In a commercial lease, generally you start in a blank piece of paper. It is up to you and the landlord to be reflected what needs to be in the lease.
Thanks, Bill. There's another question around if someone has a commercial property in another state and they are a New York City resident, would they be eligible for CLA services?
Unfortunately not. The property must be located, the business must be located within the 5 boroughs of the city.
Thanks for that. Okay, I'm seeing that James has their hand raised, so I will allow them to talk.
Hi, thank you
Hi,
for
good evening.
answering all my questions. I do have some experience with the commercial lease, and then I still have a lot of questions as well, mostly around like capital improvement portion of like the commercial lease. Like previously, when I went through the commercial lease, we didn't negotiate on like the proper what we call the capital improvement budget for the commercial lease, and is that generally reflected in the build up period, or can that be a separate term that will ask the landlord say, hey, because our engineers see the space already, here's the amount of work we'll need to bring the space up to a condition that will be suitable for us. Is that pretty common? Because for me, for the first time when I negotiate, I just don't know what is considered a fair term when I approach the landlord.
When you build out a space, you need to build out a space to suit your needs, not the landlord's needs.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of the built out space. Sometimes when you build out the space, you may unintentionally improve upon the property of the landlord. And once it becomes fixed, then the landlord can benefit that improvement. But generally, that the build-out period is for your benefit and to your specification. That to suit your needs and operate your business.
Yeah.
If you have any further questions, which is much more detailed, give us a call. We have an attorney to work with you.
Okay, I do have one follow-up question. Is regarding to end of the lease term, where some lease term will say the landlord will take possession of everything inside the premises. Is that a fair term?
Anything that is attached to the building, then it's become the property of the landlord. Anything that's movable, that is your property.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you for clarification.
Thanks, James. Good luck. Okay, we have another question. Is there a limit on how much a landlord can charge for a security deposit and how many months he can charge her rent in advance?
Again, it all comes down to negotiation. Generally, it could be between 2, 3, 4, 5 months. However, you can negotiate. If the landlord requires or requested a large security deposit up front, you can negotiate to spend down or bring down the security deposit, meaning that if you timely pay your rent, first 2 years of a 5-year lease, then you're gonna request the landlord to reduce the security deposit from 5 months to 2 months. This all comes down to negotiation.
Thanks, Bill. Are nonprofit organizations eligible for CLA services?
Is depends upon the circumstances. You give us the call and we will give you an answer.
Well, thank you. I see we have a hand raised from Nikita. I'm going to allow them to speak. Also, yes, we will put in the chat how you can reach out, the info for the CLA intake website, as well as BK's information. Thanks for that, Violetta. Hi, Nikita.
Hi, just a quick question about the rent payments. So I own the dance studio and I have a consistent leak for about 3 months from the ceiling, and landlord don't want to fix that. Do I have to keep paying him for the rent, or I don't know how I can work with him?
Well, we need to review what the lease said, and based upon the lease, then we can negotiate with the landlord. So I would suggest to give us office a call, and we can assign you an attorney to address your specific issue.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Also just want to give a shout out to Alex Cuevas, who is here from Senator Persad's office. Thank you so much for the support that you and the senator give us on this work and also many other areas of BKA's work. There's a question around receiving a copy of the slideshow. Yes, definitely, we can send that out to attendees. Okay. Great. Thank you for your email address, Alex. Okay. Any final questions before we wrap up? Okay, I'm seeing another question from James. Go ahead.
Hi, sorry, so many questions.
That's what we're here for.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah. Another thing that I have been seeing on the lease is because due to the COVID the period, the landlord has been asking the tenant to provide their monthly like a accounting statement kind of thing to the landlord. Is that a fair practice on their end, or can we negotiate that, or we simply?
No, we can. I would suggest you push back on this. Generally, you do not want the landlord to be overly intrusive in your financial. So it is best to have an attorney to speak to the landlord. I can tell you this, once you have an attorney involved, the tone of negotiation will completely change.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Thanks, James. Okay, so again, to reach our services, so I'll start with BKA services. So you can reach us at info@bka.org to get information on any of our services, including work with commercial lease assistance program, as well as our services for tenants, homeowners, taxpayers, domestic violence survivors, all the work that we do. You can reach us at info@bka.org or 718-487-2300. If you have any questions on the CLA application and need help with that, you can email clahelp@bka.org or call that same number. I'm about to put this in the chat. And then also, if you would like to register for services, you can go through the CLA website. You can go to nyc.gov/ lease, COMM lease. And I'm about to put this all in the chat. Bill, any last words from you?
No, I mean, yes, one more. We're here to help you. We want you to do well and thrive. That's what we're here for. And our services are free. Take advantage of it.
Yes. Great. Well, thank you everyone for being here and joining us. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Loveleen, who jumped off. Thank you to Councilmember Julie Menon for your support and for sponsoring the event with us. Thank you to to Senator Prasad and Alex for joining us as well. Thank you to each of you. Please spread this information. You never know who is going to need it. Again, we'll send out the presentation and our contact information tomorrow, and so that you have it in kind of your toolbox, as well as you can let your neighbors and friends and fellow business owners know about our services. I hope that you all stay warm and safe and have a good evening.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.